right, well, some folks are still filing in, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So I just wanted to start by welcoming everyone to this exclusive virtual interview with Christopher Persiani and Michael Fillios. We are really excited to have you join us today. I know that there are currently a lot of different opportunities to connect virtually right now, so the fact that you're taking your time with us is greatly appreciated. So I wanted to start by saying that. My name is Cassie Coes, and I'm the Associate Director of Marketing here in Cincinnati. I have had the pleasure of helping to coordinate all of these virtual events in response to COVID-19. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mute the entire crowd so we can cut down on that background noise. And then please feel free to enter any comments or questions in the chat feature. We will definitely have some time at the end to get to your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to put this on over to Chris.
Well, Cassie, thank you. And thank you for everybody joining today in our exclusive interview, Defining Technical Debt 2.0. And we're joined by Michael Fillios, founder and president of IT Ally, and also author of the Technical Debt book 2.0, which we'll address a little bit here later. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background before we kick this off regarding this topic in our series. So technical debt is actually the third topic in our series called Technology Overload. This series was created to provide value and thought leadership to my clients and people that I know in the marketplace, the C-levels and VP leaders of organizations who have responsibility to lead and or leverage technology to meet the goals and objectives of the organization. And what I found over the past 20 years, working with over 200 plus companies I've been blessed with, ranging from F100 to small mid-market, public, private, PE-backed, that all C-level leaders or leaders of the organization has encountered issues with technical debt. So there's nobody that's immune to this. And the issues, which we'll get in a little bit deeper as we ask Michael questions, what I've seen personally, they range from lack of IT leadership and stewardship, so no strategy, no planning, data not available or accurate to make timely business decisions, acquisitions not fully integrated, creating disparate systems, and overall poor business processes across the enterprise. And the outcome of all this is usually results in a bifurcated technology decisions in IT management. And this results in things like shadow IT departments where, supply chain builds their own IT organization because they're not getting the needs met. But all this comes, which generates a higher operating cost. And the bottom line is this tech debt has created challenges as well as opportunities to leverage these investments to drive the business strategy to really create value creation. That's what every business is, around, is to create value. And that's EBITDA, profit growth. And I'm seeing that more and more as I work with clients. So with that, I will now kind of turn this over to the question and answer session with Michael, and we'll kind of go from there. Michael, you ready?
Yeah. So first of all, Chris, thanks for hosting me today, and for Vaco for putting on these virtual conversations. I think it's really important, particularly in light of the current circumstances. And I think you set the stage up pretty well. So I know some of you on the phone know me as the CEO and founder of IT Ally. Today, as Chris said, I'm kind of joining you as the founder of the recently launched IT Ally Institute, as well as the author of Tech Debt 2.0.
So with that, we'll get to the first question, I think, which really sets us up today for this questions and answer session. Michael, technical debt has been around forever, and I know we've worked together, but can you, how is technical debt 2.0 different than the traditional definition, and why is it so important to really expand it in today's business environment?
It's a great place to start, Chris. For many of you that have been in the IT space, and I did a lot of research on this in preparing and writing the book. In fact, the term technical debt has been around for about 3 decades. So it's been around for as long as I've been in my professional career. Didn't know that at the time that I was writing this book, that it had been around that long, but have to give props to Ward Cunningham, who coined this term 3 decades ago. And essentially, the defined term back then of technical debt was really limited. It was limited to software code and design defects. And it was created such that developers would be able to take on risk of releasing software that had known bugs in it, but in order to get it to market sooner, they would make that trade-off. So it was a fairly profound definition at its time, but certainly a fairly limited definition as we know it today. And just like sort of the evolution of technology has taken place over the past 3 decades, whether you've started out your career with mainframes, moved to client server, and then been through the internet boom, and then onto today's version of the cloud, we felt that this term of technical debt itself needed to be modernized, given it has grown smarter, stealthier, and certainly more sinister than ever before. So in today's modern definition, which is why we call it 2.0, it's much more far encompassing than the previous definition, specifically talking to software defects. And I've seen this evolution myself throughout my 30-year career as a finance and IT leader. So basically, it's still debt, and we define it such as it's defined to encompass all future organizational obligations inherent in every decision to acquire, service, or retire technology. And this is where the definition begins to expand that, Chris, you started to allude to go beyond just software code into the full range of enterprise tech. That could include even off-the-shelf software, could be hardware, could be data, processes, talent, policies, leadership skills, and things of that nature. So we've really broadened the definition here to be more appropriate with today's modern technology innovations.
Michael,
back to you, Chris.
You ready for the next question?
Yeah.
Thank you. And again, we'll have questions at the end of it, so please keep sending them to Cassie. There's a lot of interesting, ways we can take this conversation. The next question on technical debt, and it really ties into the book that you put out. First, not all technical debt is bad. And in your book, you kind of define it in 3 types of technical debt. Can you go into some explanation of why they're different and kind of explain each one?
Absolutely. And you mentioned, the concept of debt, obviously, as individuals, certainly we all can appreciate and understand. And very much like debt in a financial sense, there are different ways that debt can be viewed. So what we've done here is sort of categorize 3 types of tech debt 2.0. And let me take you through each one of these briefly and provide an example so that we can make the point. So the first one here, this is called unplanned tech debt. And this unplanned tech debt is incurred due to an unexpected event. The best example that I can give here, as we've seen with many of our clients, is perhaps some sort of unplanned hardware failure. So something occurs in your environment, perhaps a server or an application is down, and all of a sudden you've got an event that you weren't planning for. Another example in this case would be perhaps a unintended cyber incident or cyber attack. This could be another area that gets some attention that was unplanned or unforeseen. Number 2 is creeping tech debt. And this is something that sort of happens gradually over time. The best example I can give here is that we've seen some of our clients that have purchased, let's say, an ERP system, let's say 2 decades ago, and over the course of those 2 decades had made systematic customizations to that ERP such that it doesn't resemble what it was when you purchased it. That can create all kinds of other challenges, which we'll talk about later on. And then the third, which gets to sort of maybe the good part of tech debt, is something that we refer to as intentional. And this is something where there's a conscious decision, by the leadership, by the company, to perhaps defer making investments at the trade-off of perhaps getting to market faster. In a lot of cases, many of you are engaging with CFOs, and as a former CFO, we would refer to this maybe as sweating the asset. Where we're making a conscious decision, we're going to run that asset to its end of life. So as long as it's intentional and deliberate, we wanted to characterize that to the point of not all debt is bad, just like as an individual would be establishing credit maybe for the first time as a new college student, let's say, to establish their creditworthiness. You're going to incur some debt on your credit card, for example. So those are the different ways that we view tech debt and the three types.
Well, thank you, Michael. I think the next question will kind of tie right into this. And it's probably an area that I see the most being in the business we're in, and I kind of alluded to when I kind of gave the opening kickoff what I see. And Michael, and what I see in organizations, what I meant by that, the symptoms. Can you go into further depth tying into these three type on the underlying symptoms that are typically or a lot of times not acknowledged, that organizations that potentially indicate signs of technical debt, and then how do you root cause those items?
Sure thing, Chris, and this is something that is certainly not an exhaustive list, but it's certainly ones that we see as we work with clients, or I've seen personally as as a IT and business leader throughout my career. So this is where we want to start to get the folks on the call here, sort of thinking about these items from their own internal company perspectives. And these are not listed in any particular order, but I'll just start with the first one here, because I think many of us as IT leaders perhaps have experienced this, particularly those that perhaps are reporting into CFOs. So if you were to look at your IT spend or your IT budget, and you characterize that spend, how much of that percentage would be spent on legacy IT versus those things that are actually modernizing your business? So the point here being is that perhaps you've got a liability or a debt that needs to be serviced, and most, if not all, of your financial resources, people and dollars, are going towards supporting that legacy environment. So that would be one symptom where there's just a misbalance of your spend against your IT investments. Another one, moving down the list here, a couple more down, is certainly something that we're seeing more currently as it relates to security and data breaches or incidents. These may not always be pegged to tech debt, but I can assure you that examples of either hardware not maintained, not being patched, the basic blocking and tackling that can create exposures for third parties to access your systems or your data and get access to that information. If you dig deep into some of the root causes, potentially there could be a tech debt symptom there lurking. So anyone that's experiencing security or data breaches, it might be something to keep an eye on. Another one is around projects in general, and whether it's projects that are just continuing to be delivered late or over budget, or in some cases having to be reworked. This could be another sign of tech debt looming. Again, going back to that example of systems that are just highly customized, they're not very agile. The inability for you to be able to meet the requirements that are being set forth could be another sign of potential tech debt looming in your organization. One that you might not think about that I also included here on the list is with respect to your talent. You may not think about talent and tech debt together, but any IT leader or person in an IT organization knows how important it is to stay trained up, to be current with all the skills, especially in a very rapidly changing field that we're in. But there's some extent that we see where tech debt can settle in from a talent perspective, whereby you don't have the right skill sets in your organization to really meet today's modern challenges. Perhaps you're dealing with, and I saw this, in several global organizations that I've worked in, much of our organization was geared towards legacy and needed to maintain those mainframe systems versus those that might be more contemporary. And we just didn't have the right skill set. So in effect, we had to create two speeds of IT, one that was supporting legacy and those that had more contemporary skills like cloud architecting and security and things like that to be focused more on the future. So there's a number of symptoms that are probably, as you look and examine your organizations, Chris mentioned data would be probably the final one that I would pull off the list here. If you've heard the expression, multiple versions of the truth, or how difficult it is to get data that's consistent and quality data to make informed and timely decisions, it could be an example that you've got data that hasn't been managed and governed effectively, so therefore it's not as highly valuable. And that could be a sign of tech debt also within your organization.
Thank you, Michael. And I just want to reiterate, every company that I've worked with has some exposure to that. And it's really what I find is leadership is what really, drives a lot of that and ability to get their arms around it. So looking forward to some additional questions from the audience on that. Michael, in your book, Technical Debt 2.0, you talked about a way to do a diagnostic of this. You basically have a tool that can measure technical debt. I was hoping maybe you can give a little detail to the crowd about that, but also also work in a real life example of how it's being leveraged in IT due diligence process.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris. And we wanted to not only talk abstractly about tech debt and in qualitative terms, we felt it was important that we create a tool, a mechanism that begins to allow us to understand tech debt in a more quantifiable way. And I'll use one analogy here for those of you that are familiar with FICO or FICO score. So as an individual, everyone has a FICO score that's begun to establish its credit worthiness. And a FICO score pulls different kind of information to really determine how much of a risk you are as an individual for ascertaining credit. So sort of keep that analogy in mind as we thought about creating a tech debt score for companies. And this would be a quantifiable way for us to understand. And by the way, we use the same ratings as FICO does. So you either have a poor, fair, good, or excellent rating, which you can see at the bottom of the screen here, and how we interpret that based on the scores that you would assign to each of these. And this is a fairly comprehensive look. We touch upon 9 categories, which you see on the left-hand side. So it can be anything from strategy and governance all the way down to portfolio and project management. And it's comprised of 54 questions across these different dimensions. And ultimately, what you get out of that, you can see a couple of different representations. One, you get an ultimate score. So that's the middle part of the screen here where you've got a gauge, again, leveraging a lot of what FICO does. In this case, we are in the good zone because our score is 62, and that puts us in a tech debt that would be defined as being proactively managed jointly by the business and IT and shows little or no negative impact on business performance. So again, alluding to the fact that, so what's the big deal with tech debt? Well, it's got to be linked to some sort of business performance impact. And then on the right-hand side, you can just see a different rendering of that across the 9 areas. So this gets into a little bit more of the weighting and the importance scales that have been assigned by each of these. So it's our opinion that underlying all of what generates tech debt 2.0 is a faulty or poor IT management system. So if we had to think about it as a root cause, that's fundamentally what we see. And that management system, as Chris alluded to, can be either in how you do strategy, how you do governance, how you drive your talent, your leadership, how you organize and prioritize your projects, and so on and so forth. And that's really what we're getting after when we look at these different dimensions. Now, Chris talked about providing an example in how this manifests itself specifically as it relates to a due diligence effort. So let me just talk a little bit about some of our experiences there. So many of you are probably familiar with the process of an acquisition or a divestiture. So in this case, whether it's a private equity or a company today that's looking to acquire, there's often a set of due diligence practices that get performed that are not only surrounding IT, but are supporting the entire evaluation of that acquisition, whether it be financial, whether it be customer, operational, product, so on and so forth, competitive nature and whatnot. Well, we've been starting to use this diagnostic at the request of our private equity clients to get a better sense as to whether or not that acquiring company is inheriting tech debt that they don't know about. So for example, if you were going to put a valuation on a company and you were going to buy that company, and then you discover that they have tech debt at a level of poor or even fair at this level, that would sort of begin to realize that you're going to make some investments post-acquisition to reduce some of that tech debt, because it's not probably intentional tech debt, it's the tech debt you don't want. So that could be, in most cases, it could be that you are acquiring a highly customized ERP system, for example, that no longer meets the needs of the business or your customers and is going to be requiring it to have to be renovated. Well, anyone knows to take on a major implementation or investment like that could have some impact on the valuation of that company. Conversely, another example would be in the area of data. Many times the clients that we're working with, there's always some comments being made around the quality of data. And our management, do they have access to the data real time? Is it trusted data? And can they make informed decisions from that data? Well, once again, we can leverage this tech debt diagnostic to get a better sense as to how healthy or how much of a liability potentially their data might be, which could then impact. This, of course, then all gets sort of factored in when we report back to the board or when we report back to the private equity firms to let them know that potentially here we might see maybe a 1 to 5% impact on valuation of that company that you're buying, given the amount of investment it might take to remedy that tech debt. So it gives the acquiring company some leverage to be able to go back to that acquiring company and negotiate perhaps a different price or valuation for that business. And it's something that if anyone's been involved on due diligence, ordinarily IT is brought in at the 11th hour, usually to go do a quick check on various systems, doesn't always have access to all the information in the data room. So this is a more quantifiable and perhaps a more thorough way of really determining truly what you're buying and the asset value associated with it.
Sorry, I was on mute. I look like I'm in a high rise, but I had somebody chopping wood with a chainsaw behind me earlier.
Oh, no.
I had to mute that. Cassie, how are we doing on time?
We're doing okay. We did actually have a question pop into our chat. Do we want to address that now or do we want to wait 10 minutes?
We have one question. Let's just wait and
Perfect.
then we'll
Okay,
go.
cool.
I have one more and then we'll turn it over to the audience.
Perfect. Sounds like a plan.
All right. I think the lawnmower service and chainsaw business is done now, so I will talk. So kind of wrapping this up onto questions for us, we're all in this COVID-19 pandemic. And Michael, when you put your book together and researching, this was not an issue. Now that this is so much part of our daily lives, both, personal and professional, I was hoping you could shed some light in basically how's a pandemic brought tech debt into focus for businesses.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an interesting question, and as you mentioned, COVID didn't exist when I started writing this book a year ago in March. The way I would sort of characterize things right now, Chris, is that sort of as a paradox. So on the one hand, we've seen IT step up in many organizations during COVID-19 to be able to prepare their organizations for the increased migration of remote workers. This has certainly been a top priority given the closure of businesses and the social distancing, and It's a great testament of what we're doing today to leverage technology, whether it be Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Google Hangouts or the vast others. IT organizations had to really step up and ensure that they have the ability to provide their employees with the productivity tools that they need to function. So on the one hand, that's very positive, right? That's an opportunity for IT leaders to shine and for them to demonstrate that they can really look at technology as a value add. Conversely, the other side of that is that we're in a pandemic. And, we are still not clear on what the financial and economic impacts are going to be as a result of this pandemic. But if you listen to the pundits or if you watch any of the market news, it's not too far-fetched to say that we're going to enter some level of recessionary time. So what is that going to mean for IT and any other function for that matter? Well, IT budgets are often under scrutiny. And as a former CFO, certainly I knew that was a big target because the IT spend for me was usually number two in terms of total dollar value versus, number one, which was salary and employee benefits and things of that nature. So people related cost. So IT spend was always a target for reduction. I think our IT leaders are going to be under more scrutiny than ever before and to really prioritize where that spend is going and what is essential for to run their business today, because CFOs are going to be asking for some level of cost reduction to contribute across all functions, given the potential impact on financial performance. So the paradox is that IT leaders are going to have to be smart. They're going to have to be smart about what items and what levers they can pull to be able to contribute towards the economic challenges, but at the same time, either taking on tech debt in order to do so. It might be deferring some investments that had been planned so that they can make smart decisions. So what does that mean? That means for IT leaders, they really need to know, what the cost of IT is for their organizations. And then most importantly, they shouldn't make these decisions on their own. These aren't decisions that you make within the function. These are decisions that are going to need to be made together with the business counterparts. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about risk and accepting risk. So IT is going to need to know what levers to pull. They're going to need to maybe look at innovative ways to be able to leverage new technologies. Perhaps that's a more aggressive move to the cloud and things of that nature, so that they can balance this need of being innovative and demonstrating how IT can be a valued asset versus also being asked at the same time to reduce their budgets. So that's the paradox that we see right now. And I've got some thoughts around what IT leaders can do towards the end in terms of a COVID-19 playbook that I can share with you all here shortly.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Cassie, do you want to go to the questions from the attendees/audience?
Sure. Hi, guys. I don't know if you all want to hop on here and ask these questions directly to Michael, or I can read them. So, Rich, if you want to unmute yourself, you were the first to ask a question. Feel free to unmute and show your face if you want. Go ahead and ask that question.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm showing my face because I am eating and
It's okay.
I'm not dressed appropriately either. But hey, Michael, you and I know each other. But my question was, do you have a methodology for quantifying the financial impact? Something to go along with that FICO credit score style tech debt, where it says, these are assumptions based on. These are soft dollar costs to your organization, things like that. Something you can put in front of someone to kind of really underline the need for action, sooner than later.
Great question. Thanks, Rich. Thanks for the question. We're developing it. So Chris talked about this use case around due diligence. So that would probably be the area that we would call out some of that quantifiable means of doing this. So for example, if through the process of our tech debt diagnostic, we see that there's a tremendous amount of legacy assets that exist in that acquiring company, the PE firm would want to know, or the leadership team of that business would want to know, what would be the potential investment needed to bring that legacies to a more contemporary state. So in that case, we would be looking at providing them with some, cost estimates to say, what's the range of investment it would take. Let's say in that case, if they would go to a more contemporary ERP system, what would that look like from a licensing and from an implementation cost and an ongoing maintenance perspective. So unlike FICO pulls a lot of data from the public domain, so they can get information through the different credit agencies. I'm beginning to look at some of those kinds of vehicles like business valuation services and other means that we can add and enrich this quantifiable question. But as you well know, quantifying risk is very elusive. It's something that, there's definitely more work needed. And part of what we'll be doing with the Institute is launching some more formalized programs to help us better understand and quantify this so that ultimately we can put some dollar values around it. It's a great question.
Great, thank you. And then Rob Beckman, if you want to hop on really quickly, if you can, and share your question with the group. Let me see if he's still with us. Otherwise, I can go ahead and read it off. Rob, are you there? Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, understand when it comes to the PE, when they're doing acquisitions, they may want to know estimates about what it would take to upgrade their ERPs, different things like that. But for a CIO that's inside of a company, the executives are very used to seeing financial statements, to seeing their financial debt. How would you suggest a CIO that's not in an acquisition mode or anything else like that be able to quantify and be able to put in front of his peers to go along and say that, we've got XYZ ERP system, it is 10 years old, or, whatever the situation is, and the debt on that has gone from, 1 million to 2 million this year, and making sure it stays front and center of their minds as they're making, budgetary and investment decisions going forward.
Hey, Rob, thanks. Great question. Again, kind of similar vein. So first and foremost here, we can't enter these conversations from a technical perspective. So I know you're not suggesting that. So for one, this needs to be a business conversation, and it needs to be tied to business outcomes. So one suggestion would be in terms of being able to talk about tech debt in means that impact our business. So one example we see is in supporting the customer experience. So if we don't have the appropriate capabilities in place to be able to deliver and delight our customers in whatever fashion that is, we could be showing signs of tech debt in our organization that impacts our customer experience. We talk about this use case in the book because we believe that customer experience certainly is one of the prominent things to demonstrate competitive advantage for your company. So the way that you would think about that is associating some sort of value against, and this is an opportunity to collaborate with some of your peers in that organization, right? So maybe there's some metrics there to look at in terms of customers that we lost or customers that we haven't been able to acquire as a result of not having some solid online capabilities, things like that. So correlate it to business outcomes. The other thing I would correlate it to is risk. And this is going to be redundant here, but at the end of the day, this is about managing risk. And all the C-suite is going to be interested in managing risk. And then it becomes a decision, do I want to accept that risk or not? So tie things back to risk, whether that's risk of growth, whether that's risk of competitiveness, whether that's risk of customer experience, or overall risk financially to the business. Correlating tech debt to those kinds of outcomes is the best way to have this conversation.
Great. Any other questions from the group? Any comments, thoughts, ideas that you want to share? All right. So Michael, you mentioned that you would go over for us some action steps for IT leaders as it relates or in response to this crisis that we've all been experiencing. I think that'd be really useful for the group, and I was wondering if you could share that with us.
Sure, Cassie. My pleasure. As I mentioned earlier, there's sort of a bit of a paradox here with COVID occurring for IT leaders in particular. And I truly believe that there's a unique opportunity here for IT leaders to positively impact their organizations during the crisis. So took some time to develop this playbook. Again, it's not all encompassing, but in using a sports analogy here, what are some of the things you can do to go on offense versus those that you can do to go on defense? And we can debate whether some of these are both offensive and defensive plays. So let me just take a minute or two here and share this with you. These are just some thoughts that perhaps each of you can take away back to your own organizations and situations. So clearly on the offensive side, and number one on the list here is no surprise, is staying healthy. Certainly your business and your family need you. So doing what you can to follow all the guidelines that we're under right now is paramount to any of this. But the next thing, and this is sort of anticipating, again, that recession that might be following here. Your leaders are going to want to know where the status of your projects are. So if you haven't already done so, and I'm sure many of you have, do a very thorough health check on your project portfolio and reprioritize the backlog. Again, for your business, that might mean deferring some projects. It might mean reinvesting in some others that are more important at this time, but do have a point of view. And by the way, in all of this, don't wait to be asked the question. I can tell you again, as a CFO, if an IT leader came in and offered up some ideas or suggestions or solutions, I was always very willing to entertain those versus me having to go chase it down. So in this case, lean into the conversation. Second thing around the way that you would operate today is to refocus some of your IT governance process and making sure that you're keeping alignment with your stakeholders and their priorities. So this is an opportunity, if you don't have governance in place, maybe to put something in place, and maybe it's more of a pandemic governance flavor, but certainly use this as an opportunity to ensure that those precious resources are being invested on the things that matter the most. Moving down the offensive plays here briefly, we've been doing this for some of our clients, is looking at an acute action plan. So all of us are good at building roadmaps and looking at time horizons that might be 1 or 2 years out. Well, we're operating in a very different timeline right now. So we've got to be much more focused and deliberate about what we're going to be doing over the 30, 60, 90, 120 days. So this is an opportunity for IT to really take a lead role in this, and then of course execute flawlessly. Last item here is to understand that the priorities that you have should be the same priorities for your business. So revenues has taken a hit. Certainly be thinking about what you're spending or investing on that impacts the customer. Between customer and revenue, those are probably the most important things for your company's financial viability moving forward. So those are just some suggested offensive plays. On the defensive side, no surprise here, right? We want you to understand, where's your tech debt rating at? So if you don't know today how your rating is, you should sort of have some idea, right? Again, this is a matter of understanding your environment. And of course, then try to set a plan to begin to improve those root causes. With respect to cyber, many of you probably have conducted various types of cyber activities, whether it be penetration tests or vulnerability tests and more tactical things, perhaps training and otherwise. But what we're suggesting here is take a look at cyber through the business lens. And this is going to help you to really prioritize those areas where critical processes that your business needs to perform, and is there or are there vulnerabilities perhaps in the underlying systems that support them. That's what we're calling a business impact analysis. Go back to your policies and procedures, and this is an opportunity, that's why it's on defense here. It's always a good opportunity going through some sort of crisis to go back and touch up these things. So in this case, we're talking about, did you have effective business continuity and disaster recovery plans that support a pandemic of this scale? Many companies, of course, didn't, because this was really not comprehended at the scale level that we've seen. So, but it's a good opportunity to go back and take a look at those. Investigate and engage with your team and come up with and also incorporate your third-party partners here to identify potential cost opportunities. I think this is, again, an anticipation that you're going to be asked by your leadership for cost-saving opportunities. Do it smartly, but also maybe there's ways that you can get your partners involved to show where they can show some cost reductions for you. And then, of course, last but not least, we got to continue to run the business. making sure that our core infrastructure, our end users are being supported, and all those things that you probably are doing today to make sure the new normal of COVID is operating as efficiently and effectively as possible. So hopefully there's some value there in some of these things. Many of you are probably doing them, but thought I would share them with you all today. So thanks, Cassie.
Yep, and we just have a couple minutes left here. Was there anything else, Michael, Chris, that you wanted to share to finish this up today?
Chris, I'll defer to you.
Sure. I think Michael's covered a lot of ground. I do believe that everybody on this call has seen and have been impacted by the symptoms, and there's a lot of people on the call that I can see that are not in the IT organization, that are probably heavy users of in finance or accounting, and heavy users. Some cases, as Michael indicated, especially in the small mid-market, IT reports into the CFO. But Michael, maybe some thoughts to the non-IT, non-IT leaders who are interfacing with IT, leveraging it every day, and they see these symptoms of, poor overall business processes, disparate systems, data, in multiple places, how they can go about, influencing, or if they're leading, start to turn that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Chris. And let me just say, part of writing this book and taking the time to do it is to create some awareness and to change the conversation, right? I've been on both sides of the ball. I've been that CFO who's looking at cost reduction and maybe not thinking about tech as strategically as I should. I've also been that IT leader and that CIO who's been trying to get increased spending to help the business increase its value. So that intersection is very challenging. I would say for the non-IT people out there, engage in this conversation and don't make assumptions that everything is black and white. You, at the end of the day, are a big part of understanding the risk for your organization, which means that if you see a line item on your budget and that budget looks like a juicy item to cut, like dealing with a server upgrade or dealing with infrastructure that may not be as apparent to the end user, take the time and really understand that, because there could be some hidden consequence of not making that investment. Challenge your IT leaders to bring you recommendations and solutions on how they can enhance and leverage technology to improve the business. Again, many IT leaders that we tend to work with have good intentions, but they fall down perhaps in being able to communicate the value in business terms. So this is extremely important. So if you do own the IT function, you're part of that. So therefore, try to help those IT leaders put those investments in business terms beyond just an ROI or return on investment. That may be only one dimension. Think of it more holistically. Look at the customer, look at risk, look at all those means that can really show how technology can be leveraged. And be open to this conversation, because as we all know, IT is an integral part of what we do. If you're thinking about it as just a necessary evil or a keep the lights on, try to expand that thinking into looking at IT as a strategic asset, right? The flip side of tech debt is tech equity. And that's the teaser for the next book, which is going to be talking about how do we create equity from technology versus debt, which is a liability. So hopefully that's a little bit more helpful, but it's a great question, and certainly would love to talk about that one more as well.
Well, thank you, Michael. Just a further note, as part of this technology overload series that we're directing towards leaders in the organization, both IT and non-IT, we're planning on having Michael back later this year, sometime probably late summer, on a more deeper dive into Technical Debt 2.0. So any questions or feedback that you can give will help us build our program for, in the next few months. We'll have a new topic Cassie will be releasing out here shortly for the month of May. And hopefully you can join us at the end of the month when we do a wrap up on that topic. But I would like to thank Michael for joining us and those who gave us time today. And with all the different prioritizations that you have, I do appreciate the almost hour that you allowed yourself to spend with us today. So thank you. Cassie?
That's it, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Be on the lookout. We will be following up with an email with this PowerPoint and some other information regarding technical debt. Definitely feel free to respond to that email with any feedback. As Chris mentioned, you know, we have been doing this for about a month now, hosting virtual events, but, you know, there's always room for improvement. So I appreciate any type of feedback towards the setup of this virtual event or towards the content in general. So feel free to reach out to us, and thanks again for joining.
Yeah, Mike,
Thank
you
you, Chris.
very much for
Thank you, Cassie, and everyone for joining. Terrific.
Yeah, have a
Be
great rest
safe,
of your day,
be
guys.
healthy. Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.